morning. Thanks for joining us. Today we're going to be mounting up a giant 200-inch Samson's Mountain Whitetail. Pretty big deer. This is the kind of deer you can shoot at Samson's Mountain. So we're going to mount him up today on this. This is a Joe Coombs form. This is a wall pedestal. This is not a shoulder mount. This is just a wall pedestal. This will go on a floor pedestal, or it'll go on the wall, either way. It's got a hanger that goes here on the back. And what I've done already, because I need this to be dry while I'm working on it, I've already cut a groove around the back here to stuff the hide in. And I've painted this with a stone accent paint, some Rust-Oleum. Kind of gives it a little bit of design. And I'll go over it again after I'm done. Just got to give it a second coat. But we're going to start off. I'm going to start putting detail in this form and get it ready to mount up. So what I like to do is put a lot of detail in the neck and get those muscles to show up really well. It's going to be kind of difficult on this deer because it's a long-haired deer. It's not like this deer back here that's the short hair, where it's a little easier to get the muscle tone to show up. But we'll give it a shot and see what happens. What I have here is a stout rougher. This cuts into the foam, allows me to get the grooves cut in, and then I'll go over it with sandpaper and smooth it out. I like to go around the shoulder and really cut in kind of deep on that, because that really makes this shoulder pop out when you kind of take that out. These Joe Coombs forms, they're kind of soft foam, which makes it easier to work with on putting detail. And this is something that doesn't necessarily have to be done. This is just my way of mounting up a deer, trying to get the detail out of it. This is not necessarily a good idea all the time, but I'm kind of picky on detail. So this form has really good detail already, but I'm going to just kind of make these muscles stick out, pop out a little bit more. What this does, it brings this deer to life. It really makes it look like he's alive. It makes the all these facial muscles, it pops them out. It makes it look like he's intense. His muscles are moving and working. And I try to do it all even on both sides, because it has to be symmetric. It has to be the same on both sides. And also doing this to these forms, these mounts, it kind of gives that deer a little bit more of a majestic look. And you'll be able to look at that deer on the wall and say, man, that's a huge, big, majestic deer. He was the king of the forest. I just like detail. I just like the deer to look just a little bit more alive. Kind of like this deer back here. The detail I've put in this one, the muscles really show up good. This deer looks like he's really paying attention to what's in front of him. He's alive. I mean, it makes these muscles pop out. If you look at a deer that's dead, these muscles are relaxed and they're just flat. They have no bulginess to them. They're not round. The other thing I've done to this one, on some of your older bucks, you might see the dewlaps here on the bottom. Most of your old bucks will have that, older deer. Young bucks, not necessarily. They don't have this droop down here. And I kind of add that in on some of these deer that are bigger. And it just makes them look more majestic. And I'll add the muscle tone in the neck. And we're even going to put wrinkles in the ears and just kind of add something different to make these mounts look really good. So I've done all that with the rougher. Now I'm gonna come in with the sandpaper and smooth this out. Now, some of this may not show up because the cape on this deer has really long hair. So but we're gonna do it anyway and see what happens. Now a lot of these forms, which nearly all of them, have the seams where they've molded them together. So I like to go in there and sand off those seam marks and just make everything smooth the way that the cape will slide right on. Shouldn't be any hold ups on it. Should slide right on there. And I'm also going to rough this up around this eye. That way when I get ready to do the clay work around the eye, the clay will have something to stick to. Because these forms, they have a coating on them, a clear coat, and it's slick. If I don't rough that up, that clay's not going to stick real well. It's going to slide around. All right, now we've got to do a little Dremel work on the nostrils here. We've got to make the nostril holes. These forms are all filled in. So I'll just take the Dremel tool. And I like to put a little ridge here in the middle of the nose. And the reason I do that, when I mount this deer up, this nose will have that plump look. It'll be round, it won't be flat. It'll look like he's alive. He's got these muscles in this nose, they're working. Another thing, I have to make sure in the nostrils that they're both the same on each side. They're both symmetric. The underneath side of that bottom part of that septum up in there, that's all straight. It's all the same, both sides. So now I'll take my sculpting tool. I use this a lot. And I'll just, where I've got to put the skin, tuck the skin in, I'm going to take this tool and I'm going to push it into this form and cut grooves in there. Now this foam, it's kind of like a memory foam. When you cut into it, it's going to want to retract back together, and that's what helps hold the skin in place. It allows me not to have to use very many pins, and the pin work is very minimal. And you don't want a lot of pins in your deer, in your mounts, because the holes will show up a lot. And sometimes those are hard to get rid of. And your mount, you mount it up a whole lot quicker. You don't have to put a bunch of pins in. But I'll take and go right along the inside this lip line, cut that groove in there. Now all I've done, I haven't taken away any foam. I haven't taken any foam out of there. All I've done is cut it. It's going to retract back together when I stuff that skin up in there, and that's what's going to hold the skin. Most eyes on these deer forms, some of them's pretty much where they need to be, but a deer, his eyes, they sit on the side of his head. They don't look forward like a predator. They're on the side of their head. That way that deer can see directly behind him. Nearly he can see all the way behind him except what's right behind his head. But if that deer is laying down in the woods and he's got something sneaking up behind him, he can rotate his eyes and be able to see directly behind him. So we've got to get these eyes set the way they need to be. And I'll take this 1¼ inch paddle bit and make that eye to where it'll set flat on the side of his head. And now this deer, instead of it being a little bit forward, now this deer can see that way, he can see that way, he can see all around him except directly behind his head. But that's what he uses his nose for. And that's to smell where he can't see. A deer's nose is probably his #1 defense against predators. He can smell a human over a mile away. So this form's ready to go now. Now we're going to go over here and we're going to go to the hide and we're going to work on the ears. All right, this is our hide here that we're going to be working with. It's really long hair, probably a late winter deer. But what I've already done to this deer, or this cape, is I've fleshed it and ran it through, we got a pickling solution down there. And this hide will sit in that pickling solution for 3 days. And what that pickling solution is salt water with, it's got the McKinsey Ultimate Acid in it. And what that acid does is control the pH level. pH level has to be between 1 and 2 for those 3 days while this cape is in there. The cape has to be fleshed first before it can go in. After them 3 days, it's going to come out. I'm going to flesh it down again and thin it and get it to where it's ready to mount. And you can see it's pretty limber, easy to work with. And after I've done that, I'll put it back in there for another day in the pickling and then pull it out, drain it in the washer, spin it, and then what I'll do is put the McKinsey tan on it. And what that does is get this hide real stretchy. And that allows me to get the detail in these hides on these mounts. You want a real stretchy hide. And also if you got a deer that's, say it's got a neck that's 18 inches and you want to put it on a little bit bigger form, putting that McKinsey tan on there, I can take it over there to the hide stretcher and I can get almost 2 more inches out of it and make it a 20-inch neck. And that's what most people want to see in their mounts, is a bigger neck on their deer. This hide's ready to go. All I have to do is get this cartilage out of these ears. That way we can replace it with these ear liners. And these are the these are the Champion's Choice ear liners. These are really good. It holds the glue really well. I'll take a rougher and kind of rough them up a little bit, make the glue stick a little better. But yeah, these work really well. They have a really good shape to them. They've worked in just about every deer I've done. The shape is perfect. They fit the ears perfect. So first thing I'm going to do is score this cartilage in this ear liner, or this ear. And I don't want to go too deep because I'll go through the skin and make some holes. It's kind of hard not to because the skin is very thin on the other side. But that's what we have the glue for, is to patch them holes. And you don't necessarily have to do this. I like to do this because I can get a little bit better detail out of the ear. And I won't have to worry about any drumming in this ear either. So I'm just taking my needle nose and working my way around and doing this a little bit at a time. I don't want to just take and rip this out because I'm going to tear big holes. If you have a pretty good tan, this cartilage peels out of these ears really easy, and you don't have to struggle getting this stuff out. That helps, that tanning and pickling helps break down that membrane that holds this cartilage into the skin, and it makes it a whole lot easier to get this stuff out. This is very, very thin skin here, so you have to be very careful. There's going to be holes that you tear eventually. I've done a few that you don't tear any holes, but it usually happens. You usually have a hole. But that's what we have this glue here for, to patch them holes. Alright, so we've got the cartilage out. And you can see the ear liners, they're going to replace that cartilage perfect. So now we have the McKinsey ear adhesive. And I'm going to add a little bit of something different to it. And I'll show you that here in a minute. This is a 2-part adhesive. It's like an epoxy, so it has to be mixed 2 equal parts. You can get this in a natural color, the pink. I like to use pink because it saves me a little bit on having to paint the inside of the ears, because this will show through the skin. And it's not going to show through too much on this cape here because the hair is so long. So it's going to hide most of the skin. So we mix this up really good. Get it good and creamy. That way it's easy to spread onto the ear liner. Now what I have here is red flocking material, and this has a dye in it. This is dyed red. What this is going to help do is, if I was doing a short hair cape to where there wasn't much hair on the inside of the ears, this would show like little veins, and they would pop through on the ear liner or on the ear, and you'd be able to, I mean, it would look real. It would look like there's real veins inside that ear. But what I'll do, I'll just take a few pinches of this stuff and I'll mix it in with the adhesive. And with this being a dye material, it's going to seep through the skin, and I shouldn't have to do much painting at all on the inside of these ears. But if you look on that, in that paste there, or that adhesive, you can see little veins that look like it's in there. So I'm just going to take this paste and I'm going to spread it in here, trying to make it spread out even. I don't know how well you can see the veins on there now. On thin-haired ears, it will show up really well. You can kind of see the little veins in there. I try to smooth this out really thin. We don't want any big clumps in there because it'll just roll up at one end when I shove this ear liner in, so we got to make it super thin. This is a very good adhesive. As soon as it gets a hold of that skin, it grabs it and holds it right in place. It gives you working time. You can move that skin wherever you need it. And wherever you leave it, that's where it's going to stay. It will not, when it goes drying, and it won't shrink up on you. It's there. I'll just push this up in that ear. You don't really want to get any of that on the hair. It's hard to get off. I mean, it'll come off with water. Any little holes that was in this ear, you can just use your fingers and pull that skin together, seal up those holes, and that glue is going to do its job. It's going to keep those holes from opening back up. And also with this adhesive, you can smooth out the skin in these ears. Any bubbles that try to pop up in there, you want to get them out of there. Now, if I was going to do a competition, I'd want to take some clay and this ridge that runs through here, I'd want to build that up to where it's, but I can take my fingers with this glue also and do this and get that ridge to pop up in there. And same thing down here, there's another one that runs through here. And that glue will hold that shape. And that's pretty much it right there. So our next process, we've got the cape ready to go. We've got our form ready to go. We've done all the sanding. We've put in all the detail work. We should be ready to put this cape on there now. So the next process is putting the hide paste on. And this is the Buckeye Supreme hide paste. You can use a lot of different hide paste. There's no specific one you have to use. This is one we use here. It works really well. Anywhere I've got these grooves that I've put in for this muscle to really pop out, I'm going to put a little extra hide paste in there to help hold that hide down in, so that hide doesn't pull away from the form. We want that hide to stick down in them grooves to show these muscles. I don't necessarily have to put hide paste on the face yet, but it helps that hide slide on over the head. So when I throw a hide on a form, I'll try and get it lined up. And I'll stick my arm right in the V of that cut that's in the back of that neck. And I'll find the center of his back. And you can usually tell by the way the hair lays and the color of it. And that's about center right there. Go ahead and run my arm up in there. And I'm just going to ease it on over. You just kind of want to go around it all different places, pull and tug, and get this hide to go right where it needs to go. Another thing I have here, if I have trouble getting the hide to go over the form, I've got a hide puller here. You don't want to use this on short-haired because it will make marks in the skin. This one fits a little tight, which is okay. It'll go. I like for them to be a little bit loose. That way I've got a little extra skin to work with. Make sure you get all the rolls out and where the hide's trying to bunch up. You want to try and get that out of there. The other thing you want to make sure is your white patch on that throat. You want to make sure you've lined it up, got it even on both sides, got the shape of the white patch right. Most white patches have a little V in the bottom of them. Some of them go straight across. This one has a slight V in it. But you want that V to be right in the middle of that neck. And the other thing, I used to do this all the time. This was my biggest mistake that I made on my mounts when I first started. And that was getting this brisket to line up where it's supposed to be. This little curly Q here is supposed to be right at the bottom of the neck and where the base of the brisket starts. And right now it's where it needs to be. And then where this hair comes together here and makes this black line, that goes right down the center of that brisket. I would always forget that when I was first doing taxidermy, and it would always be one way or the other. But you learn from your mistakes. The more of these you do, you figure them out as you go. I've been doing taxidermy now for about 25 years, 24, 25 years. And I started out just like anybody else, excited to do it, jumped right into it. And you just have to mount up a bunch of animals to learn, and then you learn from watching other taxidermists and trying to pick up some pointers from them. All us taxidermists, we try to stick together, I'm pretty sure, and which I learned from a lot of taxidermists. I watch videos. I think it's important that we learn from each other, because we all don't mount the deer or mount any animals the same. We all have our ways of doing things. But I think it's important that we learn from each other and watch how each other puts these things together. Some stuff's the same, and some stuff's different. We just have to learn and get better as we go. Brisket's lined up right where it needs to be. White patch is where it needs to be. It's center of the neck, got the V right in the middle. Nose is lined up. We're pretty much ready to start putting him together now. Another thing I used to do when I first started, I'd put my eyes in my forms first, and then I'd get them all messy and get hide paste all over them. Now what I do, these come in a little cardboard slab, and they got plastic over them. So I leave the plastic over the eyelid or over the eyeballs now, and I'll put the hide on first, and then I'll put my eyes in, and that just keeps them from getting too messy. And leaving this plastic on there, which I'll show you at the end of this mount, it keeps the eyes clean. And all you got to do is cut this plastic off at the end, and they come out just as shiny as can be. And then I'll even put a clear coat over them to kind of seal them in. Now on an eye, some of them have the pupil line in them, some of them don't. This one doesn't have it, but you just kind of have, some of them you can hold up in the light and you can kind of see the center dark of the pupil. And you want to make that thing level. This deer, I've got him about as level as I can get him on the stand, but I'm going to kind of look at him here and I'm just going to kind of eyeball it. Yeah, I'm going to eyeball it. Eyeball the eyeball. You can also use the measure to get everything level. But these eyes are so dark, if it's slightly off, you're not even going to notice it. And all I'm doing is putting clay and filling in this seam, this crack around the eyeball. And I'll add a little extra in there for when I get ready to tuck the skin in. I've got something to push the skin into. That kind of seals it in right there. And I'll kind of get in front and I'll make sure that, you know, everything looks about right. So now we've got the eyes in. Now we're going to put his antlers on. This is the best part of the whole deer. This is what everybody wants to see on their mount, is the big antlers. You can't really go by this skull plate. You keep trying to line it up, and you got to get it close, but you want to get these antlers the way they were on this deer's head. You want to make them look the best. Whoever cut this one off didn't necessarily cut this right here straight. So if you try and go by that line where that's cut at, you might be a little bit off. It might be crooked. This one's cut a little bit crooked, so I got to turn it back a little bit. The other thing you got to make sure on your antlers, 99% of the antlers on a deer, if you follow this base right here and follow the bridge of that nose and keep that in a straight line, 99% of the time those antlers are right where they're supposed to be. That's where they was on the deer's head. They always line up with the bridge of this nose. You keep this line right here and you've got it. Not all of them will be that way. Like I said, 99%. I have seen some that were way forward, and I've seen some that laid way back. But nearly all of them will be lined up with the bridge of their nose. That's where having pictures of your deer, having pictures of the customer's deer comes in kind of handy. If they did have antlers that leaned way forward or leaned way back, you would want to go by that picture. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is clay around this skull cap and get all the cracks filled in, and then I'm going to start building some muscle that was cut away when this deer was caped out, and try and just reform that and rebuild it. That way it'll show up when we put the cape on. All the muscles will be right back in place. It's important to put clay around the base of these antlers. That way when you're putting the cape up here against it, that cape, if you need to push it in to that clay to help it hold there close to the burrs on them antlers, that clay is there for that reason. That's why I shove it all the way up to the burr. It helps that cape stay up in there and not back out when it starts drying. Most of the time when the skin backs off around these burrs, it's usually around this side here or in the back. The back's hard to get to because it's going to be between the antler burr and the ear butt, and it's hard to get in there to keep that from happening. So what I usually do is put a little extra glue there and clay it up good, and then I'll take my sculpting tool, and I'll show you here in a minute, and I'll shove that skin into that clay, and that glue and the clay will help hold that skin there, and then when it goes to dry it won't back out. So I use potter's clay around the base of the skull and around the antlers. It dries fairly quick, usually overnight. And then I'll use critter clay to build the eyebrows and eyelids. And it's oil based, so it doesn't dry as quick. Potter's clay is water based. Now what I'm doing right now is just putting clay everywhere there was meat on this skull cap. Not so much here at the top, but in the crevices there was a little extra meat. Now right here on this forehead you can see these two muscles right here. That will continue onto that skull cap. And it comes up there and it wraps right across the top of the skull cap there. This will form the forehead on that deer. And if they're in rut, which this deer was in rut, that muscle is really swelled up. Their whole face swells up when they're in rut, so you kind of have to rebuild that stuff. Best thing to do is you can Google pictures of whitetail deer, the anatomy, and it'll pull up all that stuff. Or you can go to the Barnes & Noble, any bookstore, and get books on animals that show the anatomy, and that's the best way to learn it. If you've been around animals all your life, hunted them, you get to learn that stuff by skinning them. I learned most of mine from skinning. I just learned where everything laid on the head and on the face. After you do so many, you know it. But if you're just starting out taxidermy, you can Google it, Google the anatomy on the head, the neck, or just the whole body of the deer, and find out where all these muscles lay. Take pictures, make copies, make some pictures, and put them up in your shop. That way you've got something to go off of while you're mounting up these mounts. And then you'll eventually get to where you won't even look at a picture, you'll just learn it and you'll know how to do it. Now we're going to build the eyebrows and eyelids, and I use critter clay. And what I'll do, I'll roll it up, make a point at one end, and I'll shape. I have a certain shape that I go by, what I think is about the right for an eyelid, for an eyebrow on a deer, got the right shape. I'll come in here and I'll stick it in there and get where I want it, press it in, and do the rest with your finger. Get it worked in. It takes practice. First time taxidermist is not going to get this right. It takes practice and you just have to learn it. Another thing, when I dremeled this nose, Dremel tool, you use those carbine bits. You do not have to put any pressure when you're making the nostrils in these forms. You just let the Dremel tool do the work, because if you try to put pressure, it's just going to eat you up. It's going to eat that form up. You're going to make a mess. You're going to cut it all wrong. Believe me, I know I did it. And after I get my eyebrow eyelid made, I'll take a spray bottle of water, squirt it down a little bit, smooth it out, pull it all together, mold it all together, get it good and slick, make it look smooth. I always put an extra piece of clay right here above this tear duct. That way when I push that tear duct into the hole there, I can take that clay, roll it over, and it'll help hold that tear duct in place while it's drying. And it also works as that layer of muscle that lays there above that tear duct. Now I've got this eye done, so now my next process is trying to make this eye look like the eye that I've already done. It has to be symmetric. So I'll start out with about the same amount of clay. Try and get the same shape. And I'll start working it in. I'll get over here in front and look, make sure my shape is the same. Everything looks good. So now I'm just going to start pressing that eyebrow in. This is, to me, this is the fun part of doing taxidermy, is doing the clay work, building the eyes, trying to get it to look real, trying to make these eyes look round like this deer is alive. Taxidermy, it's not difficult. You just have to learn the process, learn where the hair is supposed to go. Anybody, I think, can do taxidermy. It's just the process of learning the anatomy of the animals and just how to take care of the hides and tan them. Okay. Now we got to build some ear butts. Now, one thing I'll do right here at the side of this head, rough this up a little bit so that clay's got something to stick to. This form has a center point. There's the center of the ear right there. Most of these sculptors are putting stuff like that on these forms nowadays to help you out on getting everything centered up. There's some very good sculptors out there now that have got the anatomy down on these deer, and they do really good work. Ears are going to be laid back on this deer. He's just going to be kind of relaxed and just kind of looking. He's not going to be alert, so his ears aren't going to be forward. They're just going to be kind of back. All I did was roll up the clay, make it look like a hot dog, stick it on there, roll it up in a circle, and now I'm going to form it in the shape of the ear butt and put in the muscles in the back. Show you that here in just a second. But you want to try and make all this clay run together on these muscles that's coming out the bottom of that ear butt. Now, these ears have muscles on them too. This form doesn't show it. Some forms do, but they'll have a muscle right here on the back of these forms that connects to the ear. This one doesn't show it, but I'm going to show you about where some of these muscles would lay. There's one big muscle that would lay right in here, and it would come up to the back of that ear. It would be bulged out something like so. And then you got a big one here, and then you got a lot of little ones that come through down in here. That's what controls the ears. That's how they can move their ears back and forth. A deer can take his ear and turn it all the way backwards nearly just to listen to see what's going on behind him or hear what's going on behind him. And that's what these muscles do, is control that. They can turn their ears sideways. I've seen them do some weird stuff. So we kind of have to do the same thing on the ears. We got to make them symmetric. They got to be in the same place on the side of the head. Another mistake that I made when I first started, I always had the ear butts down too low. They need to be right up almost to the base of that antler, right at the back of that antler burr. That's where they need to start. They don't need to be way down here on the side of his head. That's not where they go. They're up here. That ear canal goes right in here, so you have to kind of know that where that ear canal goes into the side of that head and in towards the brain. It's not way down here by the jaw. I used to do that stuff like that all the time, and then after I'd get done, I'd realize I messed up. But you learn. I learned from my mistakes. Now, if you want to get creative, one ear could be forward, one ear could be back, one ear could be half forward. You can control whatever you want to do. If you want to tell a story with your mount and say, well, when I shot that deer, you know, he was looking that way, his ears was this way, that way, whatever. You tell the taxidermist and they can recreate that. All right, so ear butts are in. We're ready to put him together now. I'm going to add some glue on there. All right. You have to watch when you pull this face over. You don't want to mess up your eyebrows that you just built. So I'm kind of ease that over them. These ear liners have the ear canal built into them, so all I'm going to do is shove that down into the clay and then form that clay around that and make it look like the ear, and the ear butt is all connected. I'll shove it down in there, kind of get it close to where I want it. Yeah, you'll notice that ear butt comes right off the back of that burr. It's right where it needs to be. It's right. It's not down low like I explained a while ago. It's the way I used to mess up a lot. I try to put a little extra clay in there on these ear butts because I like to be able to show this muscle that runs down off the side and then the bottom side. A little extra clay always goes a long way. It'll help you make that muscle really pop out. Another option you have making clay ear butts, you can turn these ears however you want them. If you want one ear a little more forward, you can move it a little more forward. You can turn them any way you want. And sometimes you got to go by how these antlers lay on the head. All right. Well, this is a Y cut cape. It's cut like a Y here in the back, so you just want to sew it all back together. It's not, my sewing skills is pretty basic. Nothing fancy. But when I get done sewing, it'll look like a baseball stitching. You want to keep your holes kind of close to the edge. You don't want to go back in too far and pick up a lot of hair where you're sewing at. Hair will get trapped between the skin and the thread, and you have to pull it all out. Having a long-haired deer helps hide your sewing. That helps really big. You just want to sew it up, bring everything back together where it was. On a Y cut, you've got these points here that you can kind of go by to line everything up. You've got this point here, and then where this side of the head comes up, you've got this point here. Same thing on this side, and you bring those three together, and you'll have it. There's also a 7 cut, which is kind of the same thing. It's just cut. You start over here, come across, and then down. Either cut, it's going to sew up all about the same. You can kind of make it a continuous. You can use just one. You don't have to cut your thread. On a 7 cut, you can just start at one end and go all the way to the other and not have to cut your thread unless you run out. Most of these deer are Y cut. So I'll sew the top of the Y and then cut it and then come down and sew the back of the neck. This can be a difficult spot to sew depending on what kind of rack your deer has that you're working on. If they got a lot of burr or a lot of points around the burr, it makes it difficult. It can be a pain in the hind end, but it can be done. So I'll tie the knot at the end, and I'll take that skin and get it pushed around that burr, get it underneath the bumps, crevices, get it all tucked in where it's supposed to be. That clay that I put around them bases, that'll help hold around that antler, that skin around the antler burr. All I do is run my thread through my needle, bring it back around, tie it at the end, or tie the two ends together. And now I'm ready to start sewing again. You can start at the top or you can start at the bottom, either way. Of this cut in the back of the neck. Another thing I try to do when I'm fleshing my capes is I'll flesh this part where I'm sewing. I'll try and flesh that as thin as I can get it without making it too thin to where the skin won't hold. But I want to make it thin enough where it's not hard to get the needle to go through the skin, and I don't want to make it too thin to where it's going to tear when I pull it tight. It has to have that about an 1/8 inch thickness. If you get less than an 1/8 inch thick, usually you start tearing a little bit. When you cinch this down, it'll want to tear. And I can just pull it like that, and it's going to pull it all together. Main thing is trying to keep the hair from getting trapped underneath the thread. Just trying to keep the hair rolled away from the edge of the skin where you're working. And I try to make all my incisions or all my stitches about even, same distance apart. 1/2 inch or so. And you can go, it could go even shorter than that. I mean, you could go 1/4 of an inch. So now at the very end, I'll just run that needle through both sides there, tie it off in a knot, cinch it down good. The thinner I can flesh a cape, the less shrink I'll have. If there's still a little bit of flesh in there, a little bit of that membrane, going to cause it to pull and shrink, and it's going to cause your stitching to open up. So you want to try and thin your capes as thin as you can get them around the neck, especially where you're sewing. This deer was a little bit of a fighter. Looks like he's got a lot of scars on him. You're going to get that a lot with any big buck deer. They always fight, spar, get gouged in the eye, get their nose scarred up. Especially in the back of the head, they always, antlers will wrap around and gouge them in the neck. A lot of times you'll have holes back there. It's just part of it. You just gotta, you can sew them up, you can hide them by pinning them. So now while I was sewing, the ears moved a little bit, so clay's still soft, I can move them back to where I want them. Now with having clay ear butts, you can kind of get creative. You can build the wrinkles where their ears move back and forth. They leave wrinkles in the bottom of the ear butts. And the other thing I was going to show was this skin around these burrs. I can use this sculpting tool to push that skin into that clay I created around that antler burr. And that will hold in place. I won't have to put any nails in there, any pins or anything. That will hold right where it needs to be. Since these ears are kind of back a little bit, I'm going to build some wrinkles in the back of his ear butts here. Give that lifelike look. It's kind of hard to make that show up with the hair so long. I've got these little brushes here. These are from Matuska. This little V brush here, triangle brush, really good for ears. You can get down inside, pull that hair, brush it out, make it look pretty. And we got the back of our ear butts formed, and now we want to do the front. We want this muscle to show up here. So I'm going to take my tool and do a little sculpting here. Okay, now we can get to work on these eyes. So you can see I left the inside of that eyelid, I left some skin sticking out there. Well, that's the skin that I used to tuck that eye into place, that eyelid. I'll get it about where it needs to be, pull that skin down. First thing I start with is the tear duct. That's kind of your center point. You want to get it started out right. You get it started right, and usually everything else will fall right into place. It goes right into that hole I made with my tool earlier. Now everything right now, you can see that eyelid fell right into place. It's right over that eyeball, right where it needs to be. So now I'm just going to take my tool and tuck that skin in and shape that eyelid. Now I want to make this eye look round. So I'm going to pull that back side down just a little bit. Eyelashes need to lay almost sticking straight out or slightly down. You can point them down a little bit extra because the eyelid's going to try and draw up a little bit, so we'll pull up some. You kind of make them look sleepy to start with, like their eyes are like he's a sleepy deer, and then as he's drying they'll open up a little more. I'll use 2 pins on an eye, and usually no more than that, depending on how well shaped the eyelid's in. I'll put one of the bottom eyelid in that front corner, and then I'll put one on the top, and that will hold that in place. Clay that I put right here on the top edge of that tear duct, I'll take and roll it over now, and that'll hold that tear duct down, keep it from rolling out. This deer has a scar here where he's been fighting. It comes all the way down his face here. That kind of gives him a little character. Now we've got to make this eye look just like the other one we just made. So now I'm going to put this nose together. Put a little glue in there. I'll try and shove a little extra glue inside that mouth. That way it'll stick really well, won't pull out. I'll pull this over. First thing I usually try to do is get everything in place before I start tucking the lips in. I'm going to get the nose pad lined up. I want all the corners to be perfect. Go right where they're supposed to go. Get that nose pad. This pad needs to come back about 3/4 of the way of this bridge right here on this nose. This is about 3/4, half would be about right here. So that's pretty close right there. I'll tuck everything in. Now these 2 corners right here on the nose pad, they need to be on the top, right almost on the top edge of this nostril, and they need to be even. I usually take my fingers and I'll poke right inside the nostrils and get them lined up. That's how I can tell that they're even. Now when I go to tucking these lips in, they're probably going to pull out a little bit, but right now they're where they're supposed to be. Once I get those tucked in, I can come back and position that back up. Now, to make this a little easier on tucking the lips in, these stands are made to where we can swivel them upside down. This makes things a whole lot easier. You can also check your eyelids while you've got this thing upside down, and check for symmetry on them. Try and push them into place. Okay. Now this is the lip tucking tool. They come in different sizes, shapes. I like this one. It fits my hand good. You have to get something that really you can work with. That everybody's hand's different size, but this one fits me really well, so this is the one I use. Now I'm going to get this center of this nose pad. There's a line right here, and I'll line it up right in the middle, and I'll tuck the front of the nose pad in first, and I'll come back to the corner of his mouth, and then I'll tuck each side in, each corner in, and you can tell where the corner is by the way that hair lays at the back. Hair's coming down, hair's coming down, and then right here it changes directions and goes back this way too. Well, that's your corner right there. It kind of makes a little bit of a curly Q in there. And once you get those corners in and your front nose pad, everything's lined up. Now everything will fall right into place. Once I'll get everything in, I'll make sure it's even on both sides. These hairs His hairline should be right at the bottom edge of that mouth there. Should be all in a straight line, smooth, no puckers. It's not rolled up. Now I'm going to do this bottom lip. And there's a center point on this bottom lip where all these hairs come to a point here, which there's a little hole right there where I fleshed too thin, but that's the center point. You got hairs going this way, hairs going this way, and you kind of pull them together, and that's your center point. So you want it to be right there in the middle. Sometimes you can leave this bottom lip sticking out like this in the front. Sometimes you can push it all the way in to where it's just the hair and no bottom lip. It depends on what that deer's doing. You can tuck him in about like that. If he's relaxed, he might have a little bit more bottom lip showing. If he's chewing, or if he's been eating, if he's a little more tense, if he's alert, it might be tucked in a little more. He's a little more tense and looking at something. Pull all that together. Make sure everything's lined up where it's supposed to be. There's no puckers. Looks good. Whiskers sticking straight out. That's good. That means the hide or the skin is where it's supposed to be. It's not pulled back too far, and it's not too far forward. They're sticking straight out. And there we have it. I'll come get back in the front here, check everything. I'll try and tuck this in maybe a little more. And take one pin and pull this together and hold it. Just kind of put everything in place. So now I'll use some plastic, push these nostrils into place. You see, pull it down just a little bit right there, so I'm just going to pull it back to where it needs to be. Everything's symmetric now. So I use plastic to push that skin, make it smooth inside there, pushing in the nostrils. Okay, now we'll tuck this skin. This one had a little bit of an indentation there. I just made it deeper with the Dremel tool, which makes it easier. Nearly all the Joe Coombs wall pedestals do. The Mackenzie, they don't. You have to make your own on them. But yeah, they have a small indentation, and you just take the Dremel tool and follow that, make it deeper so you got enough trench air to shove the skin down into. And then on these backs, you don't have to put this stone paint on there. You can put like a leather backing, leather material. You can put felt on there. You can put whatever you want. You can make your own design. Anything will work. Back's all done. Propped up here. That's basically it. All you gotta do now is keep them groomed out while they're in the drying process. Work with them about every day, just do a little bit to keep them looking the way you want them. I always like to take these hairs and curl them around the back. It kind of makes it look more uniform, make it looks nice. And you can see the grooves that we cut in the form. The skin went right down in there. Kind of gives it that depth on that shoulder. When this starts drying, that'll pull in there even more with that glue holding it. And those muscles, you'll notice when you're doing these, if you like putting muscle tone in them like that, you'll notice a difference about every day. You'll see the muscles start coming out a little more. If you want to make it look, make them stay in there to ride off, you can also use this tubing and run in these muscle grooves here and run it all the way down and just pin it. Leave it in there for a couple of days, and that will also help keep the skin in place. This one here, it seems to be falling into place. It's trying to pull out just a little bit right here. I may put a little pin or something in there, but you can do little things like that to pin stuff up to make the muscles really pop out. I like using these little T-pins. You can get them from anywhere. They're just McKenzie, Van Dyke's, Matuska. Everybody has them. They go in really well. They'll hold the skin in place. We're back here. It's been about roughly a week since we mounted this deer here up. And today what we're going to do is do a little clay work around the eyes, nose, and inside the nostrils, and then paint him up and finish him up and get him looking good. So what I've been doing is back brushing a little bit, trying to get these hairs to stand up on the muzzle. Just trying to keep them from laying flat. Get them all going the right direction. And you can see the hairs, it looks real fuzzy now. The hairs are really soft. So we're ready to start doing a little clay work. And what I'm using is an epoxy sculpt. I've got black and I've got pink here. It's a two-part epoxy. We're going to start off with the pink and work on the nostrils. Take my plastic out of here. What this plastic done, that kept the skin pushed down inside the nostril and formed everything we carved out in there earlier. And it's laying in there pretty good now where it's supposed to be. So what I'm just doing is mixing this two-part epoxy up. And it's not going to take a whole lot on this deer. We had a lot of extra skin to put in there, so everything's sealed up good. The other thing I like to use is the safety solvent, and that keeps the epoxy sculpt creamy and smooth and easy to work with. This epoxy sculpt will also kind of seal off the skin where it's been cut, and you can blend it together to make it where you can't see where the skin was cut inside the nostril. And it also helps hold the skin down. If it decides to start pulling away anymore, this epoxy will help hold that down and won't let it move. Moving these mounts from different rooms, you get different room temperatures, the air quality, the humidity is different in each room. If this mount was going in a living room, say close to a fireplace, that's going to cause the skin to draw up even more. So doing this kind of stuff here will help hold that skin down, keep it in place. Now to smooth that out, I'll just put a little safety solvent on that sculpting tool and just smooth this out and make it look real, like pretty much like skin inside that nostril. Make it real smooth. Blend it all together, cover up all the seams. And then what I like to do is take a Q-tip, Put a little safety solvent on it. And just kind of smooth everything out with it. Finish it off. Safety solvent, boy, it don't take much of it. It's just a few drops. It kind of goes a long way. You could also use water, but water's not going to allow the epoxy sculpt to stick like it needs to. That's pretty much it on the nostrils. Now they're ready to paint later on. Now I'm going to start on the around the eyelids, on the lip here on the mouth. And I'll be using black for that. Okay. So right here where we tuck the bottom lip in, there's a little bit of a crack there, so we're going to seal that up. And you can also, if you want to build to that bottom lip, you can use that epoxy sculpt to kind of add to that. And kind of form that bottom lip there. Sometimes those bottom lips, they get cut off when they're being skinned, or they get, if a deer's been fighting, they get a wound and sometimes they scar up their bottom lips. So sometimes you have to kind of rebuild that. And I'll just take a pin and put the little lines and stuff in that bottom lip and make it look real again. That's pretty much it on the bottom lip. What that does is seal off where the nose pad comes down and the bottom lip meet. That seals that crack in there. Now we can do the eyelids. You want to make sure you have plenty of light when you're doing this too. That way you can see, you know, every little crack that's in there. We're just going to fill in right around the eyelid, between the eyeball and the eyelid there, all the way around. Kind of fill in any spots where the eyelids might have a little crack in it, where the critter clay might be showing through. Little things like that. That's what this epoxy sculpt is good for, is covering that stuff up. It doesn't take a whole lot on these eyelids. You just need a little bit to shove down in there. And this is going to seal off everything. It's going to make it look like the eyelid is actually touching that eyeball like it's supposed to be. And then at the end, we're going to put some gloss on there, and that'll help seal it off too, and make this eye look like it's alive. It'll be wet look. It'll be a wet look eye, and it'll really show its detail. And I'll also put a nictitating membrane in there in this corner. Kind of give that eye a little more lifelike look to it. And it depends on your mount too. If the deer's relaxed, you might see a little more of that nictitating membrane. If he's more alert, you may not see that much of it, because it might be inside the eyelid more. Because he's more alert, his eyes are wider open, he's trying to take in more light, so that nictitating membrane, what it does, it slides on that eyeball, and it'll tuck itself back in underneath the eyelid. And keep everything smooth around that eyeball. One good smooth line. You don't want to see any jagged edges on the eyeball. It's one smooth, continuous circle around that eyelid. The eyelids don't have any notches in them. They got to be smooth. So now we're ready to do a little painting. And I'll start out with the nose. And I use the airbrush. It's a single action. Probably about 60 to 65 pounds of pressure is all you need for airbrushing. And I use lacquer paint. It's easy to clean. It goes on real fine. It gives this skin a good soft look. I like it better than water-based paint. And what I'm going to do is just kind of go in here and cover up all the skin area that just looked kind of dry, kind of give it the color back. And then I'll show you how we do a nose pad. To do a nose pad, most taxidermists I think are doing it this way now. It works really well. And I'm going to cover this nose pad completely in pink. This is a dusty pink. While I've got the pink in here, I'm going to go through here and touch up a little bit on the ears. This deer has a lot of hair inside his ears, so not going to be a lot of painting involved here. And we used that dye in those ear liners, so that helps too. The red dye helps show through the skin. Gets kind of foggy in here when we use airbrush. So now what I'm going to do on this nose pad, I'm going to put a little lacquer thinner on this paper towel here. I'm just going to wipe this off. Now, what that's done, all that pink that I put on there is now in those little crevices on the little dimples on that nose, and it's got that fleshy look now. This is going to give that nose a softer look. Ready to do a little nose pad gray. And what I'm going to do, when I spray this on, I'm going to kind of come in and from a side angle. I don't want to get this gray inside those crevices where the pink is. I want that pink to show through. I'll come in from both sides. Each time I get a new color, I have to clean my airbrush out because I don't want to mix these colors. So I just use that lacquer thinner and spray through it. Now we're going to go to cocoa brown, and you can even use a lighter brown on this. Cocoa is the color I've always used. We're going to do this around the eyes. If you've got a picture of the deer that you're mounting, they're not all the same color around the eyes. Some of them are light brown, some of them are dark brown. You just kind of go with what the picture looks like sometimes, but cocoa brown is what I always use. It's the closest color, in my opinion. A lot of different techniques on airbrushing these deer. A lot of different ways you can do this, especially on this nostril. I could have shoved some towels or some plastic in there and sprayed around that and not covered up the fleshy pink part. But this airbrush, if you get the poundage right on it, you can almost draw a straight line with this airbrush. Okay, so now I've painted around the eyes. Now I'm going to take my little fine brush here and I'm going to brush these hairs that I got paint on. And what this does, it cleans the hair but doesn't clean the skin. You want that paint to stay on the skin. And this kind of blends it all together, gives it that soft look. Gives it that more realistic look. And that's what we're shooting for. We want these deer to look like they're alive. So now we want this nose pad to look a little plumper than what it is. It's just kind of looks like it's just pasted on there right now. So what we're going to kind of do is bring this nose pad back to life. And what I'm using is Mod Podge. And this will take a little bit of time here. I'm going to paint this on, and then we're going to take a break and let that dry. And then we'll come back and do the finishing touches on it. And this also works as a good sealer too. We've got the Mod Podge on there. We're going to let this dry, and then we're going to come back in when that dries, and we're going to put some more Mod Podge. We're going to come back in and put the beads on the nose, and I'll show you how we're going to do that. And then we'll have to let that dry, and then we can put the finishing touch of black paint on there, and then gloss him up, and he'll be finished. We're all dried up now, and we're going to start on the beads on the nose. So what I'm going to do, make this a little easier to get to. So what this is just a detail bottle. It has Mod Podge in it. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to go through here and hit all these little dimples on this nose. I'm going to put this Mod Podge on there and make all those stand up, and then we'll let it dry for a few minutes, and then we'll come back in with the paint over it. Mod Podge, it dries clear, so that'll really make things stand out. And when I'm putting these dots on here, I want to make sure I'm putting them kind of the same shape as the little bead that's on the nose already. All right, so we'll let that dry for a few minutes, and then we'll go over it with the paint. Seal everything up. Fan on him and let it start drying. All right, so it's dried for the most part. So now I'm just gonna, oh my, what in the world? So this is a jet black color. I'm gonna put it on real thin. I don't want this to be too black. I'm going to come in at an angle again, and I just want to kind of hit the edge, hit those beaded up spots that we made with the Mod Podge. And we'll just kind of soften it up as you go down with it. And a little bit on that bottom lip. And then we're going to go around the eyelids. Just hit the edge of those. After we spray that, I'll go over it with the brush, clean off all the edges, clean off the hairs. Soften him back up a little bit and get those hairs to stand up around the muzzle there. Now I'm going to peel off the plastic eyeball, find my scalpel. Got that good clean look now. And now what I'm going to do is put in the little nictitating membrane in the corner of that eye. I'll just use a small pinch of it, kind of get it in a half moon shape. Place it in there. And then I'll make sure I got some safety solvent here. And I'm going to take my scalpel and just kind of work it in to the shape that it needs to be. Get it right in that corner and work it in. All right, now the last finishing touches. Put on the clear coat. Make this eye look like it's wet. Makes him look alive. I'll put a little extra in that corner of the eye, just kind of let it bleed in. It'll go in the crevices where it needs to go. But you want to make sure you cover up that nictitating membrane too, kind of blend it in and let it take in the clear coat. And then I'll put some on his nose and I'll let it bleed down. And it usually rolls right into place. If you go to brushing it on there, you'll wipe all your paint off, so you kind of gotta let it bleed on. And you can also put this in the airbrush and spray it on too if you want to. And there you have it. That's the complete deer mount right there. That's the 200-inch Samson Mountain Whitetail. I hope you enjoyed all this that we've done to this deer. Like I said, I'm not the best taxidermist in the world, but this is kind of how I do my work, and hope you enjoyed it. If you decide you want to come and shoot a 200-inch whitetail at Samson Mountain, just give us a call at 618-771-3992. Thanks for joining in. Thanks.